The silence inside the executive conference room became almost unbearable. Senior managers looked at one another, hoping someone else would answer first. A few quietly lowered their eyes toward the polished table, while others shuffled papers that suddenly seemed far more interesting. Then the billionaire's question. Roland Ashcombe had built Harrow Dynamics from a tiny workshop into an international company through one simple principle. The best ideas mattered more than expensive suits or impressive titles. The hesitation before him told him everything he needed to know. Someone had created an extraordinary solution, yet no one was willing to give that person credit. Roland calmly asked the question again, this time even more firmly. Every executive felt the weight of his words. Finally, the director of operations admitted that the proposal had been delivered only a short time earlier by an employee who had already been suspended. Roland's expression changed immediately. He requested the employee's personnel file, recent performance reviews, and every report connected to the suspension. Within minutes, assistants hurried across the building collecting documents, while nervous whispers spread through every department. As Roland carefully examined Adrian Mercer's employment history, a clear pattern appeared. Year after year, Adrian had received outstanding evaluations from co-workers, clients, and supervisors. He had solved scheduling conflicts, reduced unnecessary expenses, trained new employees, and often volunteered for difficult assignments without asking for recognition. Yet promotion after promotion had passed him by. Even more disturbing, several successful initiatives credited to senior managers closely resembled recommendations Adrian had quietly submitted months earlier. Roland slowly realized that the company had overlooked one of its brightest minds simply because he never demanded attention. The billionaire then compared the reports that had justified Adrian's suspension with the original project records stored in the company's digital archive. The differences were impossible to ignore. Important progress updates had been removed before reaching the CEO's office. Deadlines that Adrian had successfully met had been rewritten to appear incomplete. Responsibility for failures caused by outside contractors had somehow been transferred to Adrian's department. It became painfully obvious that someone had manipulated the information before the CEO ever saw it. Victor Hale watched Roland's expression grow increasingly serious. Until that moment, he had believed he was protecting the company by acting quickly. Now he realized he had made a life-changing decision without verifying the facts. His confidence slowly gave way to deep regret. The suspension had not been based on dishonesty from Adrian, but on incomplete information and rushed judgment. For the first time since becoming CEO, Victor understood that leadership required patience as much as authority. Roland immediately ordered a full internal review and asked one simple question that echoed through the conference room. He wanted to know where Adrian Mercer was at that exact moment. Nobody had an answer. The employee everyone suddenly needed had quietly left the building hours, earlier carrying nothing except his old leather bag and the heavy burden of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Adrian walked through the sunny streets toward Nolan's elementary school. Although worry filled his heart, he refused to let his son see the pain behind his smile. When Nolan came running through the school gate with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, Adrian greeted him with the same warm embrace he offered every afternoon. They stopped at a small neighborhood park where Nolan excitedly described a science project and proudly showed a drawing he had made of the two of them. Standing beneath a giant tree, Adrian listened with complete attention, hiding the suspension letter deep inside his bag. In that moment, he decided that no hardship would ever steal his son's sense of security. Back at their modest apartment, father and son prepared dinner together as sunlight filled the tiny kitchen. They laughed while chopping vegetables, accidentally spilled flour across the counter while making homemade bread, and ended the evening reading Nolan's favorite adventure book. After Nolan finally fell asleep, Adrian quietly sat beside the window looking over the city lights. Bills covered the small table in front of him, yet he chose not to surrender to fear. Instead, he updated his resume and began searching for new opportunities, believing that honest work would eventually open another door. Across town, Roland refused to end the investigation. Security footage revealed Adrian calmly returning to the building after receiving his suspension simply to leave behind the blue folder that everyone now praised. The billionaire watched the recording twice. There was no anger on Adrian's face, no revenge, no attempt to embarrass anyone. Even after being treated unfairly, he had chosen to help the company because he believed protecting innocent employees mattered more than protecting his pride. Roland slowly leaned back in his chair. In decades of leading businesses around the world, he had met countless talented people. Very few possessed that kind of character. By early evening, the investigation uncovered another painful truth. A senior executive named Marcus Grayson had quietly taken credit for several of Adrian's previous recommendations over the years. Fearful that Adrian's newest recovery plan would finally reveal the truth, Marcus had influenced incomplete reports that shifted blame toward Adrian's department. Although he never expected the suspension to happen so quickly, he remained silent when it did because removing Adrian protected his own reputation. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails, document histories, and archived revisions told the full story. Marcus had not only stolen ideas, but had also allowed an innocent father to lose his job rather than admit the truth. Victor Hale felt the weight of every decision he had made that morning. Looking around the room, he realized that policies and performance charts meant very little if leaders failed. To see the people behind them, Adrian had spent years quietly serving the company with loyalty, only to be dismissed without a chance to explain himself. Roland closed the investigation file and gave one final instruction before leaving the conference room. The suspension was to be canceled immediately. Marcus Grayson would face disciplinary action according to company policy. But Roland had one more request that surprised everyone. He wanted Adrian Mercer found before sunrise the next morning, not because the company needed his brilliant recovery plan, but because a leader who acted with integrity deserved to hear the truth directly from those who had wronged him. Far away, Adrian remained completely unaware that the company he believed had forgotten him was now searching every possible way to bring him back. As he quietly checked on Nolan one last time before going to bed, he gently pulled the blanket over his sleeping son and whispered that somehow everything would be all right. He did not know that the sunrise, waiting just a few hours away, would become the beginning of the greatest turning point of his life. The suspension letter landed on the desk, just as the morning sun poured through the glass walls of the corporate headquarters. Hundreds of employees watched in silence as a hardworking single father slowly picked up the envelope with trembling hands. No one noticed the thick folder lying inside his worn leather bag, the folder containing an emergency plan that could save the company from the biggest financial disaster in its history. Within only a few hours, the billionaire owner would arrive unexpectedly, hold that same folder in his hands, and ask a question that would leave the entire executive floor frozen in shame. Who made this plan? That single question would change one man's life forever. Before we begin this unforgettable story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to Soulful Tales2 if you believe that honesty, compassion, and hard work always find their way back. Morning sunlight covered the skyline as employees filled the towering headquarters of Harrow Dynamics, one of the country's fastest-growing engineering companies. The building represented success, ambition, and innovation, but behind its shining glass walls, many ordinary people quietly carried extraordinary burdens. Among them was a calm and dependable project coordinator named Adrian Mercer. Every morning before sunrise, Adrian prepared breakfast for his 9-year-old son Nolan, packed his school lunch, watered the tiny flowers on their apartment balcony, and walked him to the neighborhood school before beginning the long commute to work. Life had changed dramatically after. Adrian lost his wife several years earlier to a sudden illness. Since then, every responsibility rested on his shoulders alone. He never complained because Nolan's hopeful smile reminded him why every sacrifice mattered. Money was always tight, but Adrian carefully planned every expense. His jackets were old but clean. His shoes were repaired instead of replaced, and every paycheck disappeared into rent, groceries, school supplies, and medical insurance. Despite the constant pressure, he remained one of the most respected employees among his coworkers because he always solved problems without asking for recognition. Unknown to almost everyone inside the company, Adrian possessed an extraordinary talent for strategic planning. Whenever projects faced delays or budgets became unstable, he quietly stayed late, studying reports and building alternative solutions. His managers often used his ideas without mentioning his name, believing that recognition belonged only to senior executives. Adrian accepted the unfairness because he believed good work eventually spoke louder than titles. The company had recently entered the most challenging period in its history. Several major construction contracts had fallen behind schedule after suppliers unexpectedly increased prices. Departments blamed one another, while meetings stretched endlessly without meaningful solutions. Anxiety spread through every floor of the building. Rumors about layoffs circulated during lunch breaks. Families depended on those jobs, and every employee feared becoming the next person called into human resources. Watching the situation unfold, Adrian spent many evenings after. Nolan had fallen asleep creating a comprehensive recovery strategy. Working from his small kitchen table beneath a single reading lamp, he analyzed budgets, transportation routes, supplier contracts, labor schedules, and customer timelines. Piece by piece, he created an innovative plan capable of saving millions of dollars while protecting employees from layoffs. He never expected praise. His only hope was that someone would read it before it became too late. On a bright Tuesday morning, Adrian finally placed the completed proposal into a neat blue folder. He arrived at work earlier than usual, hoping to submit it before the executive meeting. But before he could reach the operations office, a message instructed him to report immediately to the executive conference room. The atmosphere inside felt unusually cold despite the warm daylight streaming through the windows. Several senior managers sat around the polished table with serious expressions. At the center stood the newly appointed CEO, Victor Hale, a man celebrated for delivering rapid results, but criticized for making decisions before understanding the full story. Determined to prove his authority during his first month in charge, Victor had already replaced several department heads and demanded impossible deadlines from everyone else. Without asking Adrian a single meaningful question, Victor announced that recent project delays reflected poor coordination. A series of incomplete reports had reached his office, and Adrian's department was blamed for missed milestones. The truth was far more complicated. Critical information had been removed from the reports before they reached the CEO, making Adrian appear responsible for failures created by others. Yet no one around the table spoke up. Silence protected careers. The suspension letter was placed before Adrian, effective immediately. He was removed from active duty pending further investigation. Every sound inside the room disappeared. Adrian looked down at the document, thinking not about his own pride, but about Nolan waiting for him after school. Rent was due in 2 weeks. School tuition needed to be paid. Their aging refrigerator had already begun failing. Losing his income, even temporarily, could destroy everything he had worked so hard to protect. Still, Adrian refused to argue. He quietly accepted the envelope, thanked everyone for their time, picked up his worn leather bag, and walked toward the exit with dignity that many people in the room did not deserve. As he reached the lobby, one of the younger administrative assistants hurried after him and apologized with tears in her eyes because she knew he had always treated every employee with respect regardless of position. Adrian simply smiled gently and reminded her never to lose faith in kindness, because difficult days never last forever. Outside, the daylight felt strangely peaceful despite the storm inside his heart. He sat on a nearby bench beneath a flowering tree, opened his bag, and looked at the blue folder containing the recovery plan. For a brief moment, he considered throwing it away. After all, why should he continue? Helping a company that had just suspended him without listening to the truth? Then he remembered something his late wife had once told him. Character is revealed not when people reward you for doing good, but when doing good costs you something. With quiet determination, Adrian stood, walked back inside the building, and respectfully handed the folder to the reception desk with instructions that it be delivered to the executive office regardless of whether anyone remembered his name. He then walked away into the bright afternoon, unaware that destiny had already begun moving in his favor. Only 3 hours later, an unexpected helicopter landed on the company's private rooftop. The founder and billionaire chairman, Roland Ashcombe, had arrived without advance. Notice after hearing alarming reports about the company's declining performance. Known for personally reviewing important projects, Roland immediately requested every strategic proposal prepared during the past month. Stacks of reports filled the conference table, but one simple blue folder caught his attention. He opened it. As he turned each page, the room became completely silent. The calculations were flawless. The logistics were brilliant. The financial recovery model protected employees while restoring profitability. It was the most intelligent operational strategy he had seen in years. Roland slowly closed the folder, looked around the room, and asked a question that no executive was prepared to answer. Who made this plan? Not a single person spoke. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation.